On today's 7th Circle Gaming, we analyze Medieval Kingdom Wars, or to put it another way, what happens when Total War meets Age of Empires. We'll get started here in just a second, like we always do, with full disclosure, and you are very cordially invited to pause the video now and read through all of these at your leisure. Or if you'd prefer not to, we'll move right into the screenshots. And the first one that we want to share with you is what the world looks like in the grand strategy view, for want of a better phrase. There are a couple of high points that we want to mention on this screen. The user interface has a couple of important features. The currency or the resources at this level are displayed on the top left-hand corner of the screen. We've also chosen to share with you the town development screen, which is again on the bottom left. One thing we also want to point out is players might notice on all of the towns that are displayed, there's a number in a shield. Now, that is the defensive strength of the village, town, city, whatever. And it certainly seems from all of our evaluation sessions that is based more on the number of units stationed as a garrison there than it is necessarily on the strength of the fortifications, the walls. In other words, that's definitely the word we were trying to think of. So, just a point to note. And the next screen that we want to share with you is the town view. And this is where the game really seems to verge into more of that SimCity town management style of game. A fair amount of the buildings clickable, with some having unique functions that were only accessible at this level. The one that we would draw your attention to is the Manor House, which takes the place of a town hall or something like that, which seemed to be the only place where the faction-specific technologies were researchable. But either way, that's neither here nor there. We've got quite a few screenshots that we want to share with you, so let's move on to the next one. This next screenshot we're sharing with you because it's something that we ourselves only discovered in our most recent evaluation session. And that is that we were all set to say that the only way to upgrade any building was through that town screen. However, after some exploration of the user interface, which doesn't really say much for the tutorial or the user interface itself, it is entirely possible to upgrade buildings through the Grand Strategy menu. And for that reason, we've chosen to share that with you. Next screen that we want to share with you is the third, broadly speaking, portion of the game, and that is the upgrade system, and we'll include the diplomacy in that as well. Because what we're looking at here is the technology research screen. Also worth noting is at the top of the screen, there's a sort of marketplace of additional resources that the game uses as resources for purchasing upgrades or new technologies. How those are obtained isn't necessarily made clear, but it is entirely possible that the answer to that question can be found through researching additional technologies or capturing them by conquest. So, that aside, we would just point out one final thing before we move on, that the circles with the white X's in them only indicate that a technology is available to be researched, not that it is possible to, or not that that is researched. And yeah, there are some more complicated issues with the user interface at this level. So let's move on to our next screenshot, and that is the diplomacy system. And there's a fair bit to say about this. So, what we are looking at here is the diplomacy screen that is available to the count or duke level that the player is going to most likely be starting out at. We only have 3 options, which are essentially be nice, give a gift, or give some sort of offense. Now, when the player becomes the leader of their particular faction, an additional 6 or 7 options become available, which adds to the diplomacy system substantially, but not overly significantly. So, it might appear bare bones, or to have a bare bones diplomacy system at first, but it does become much more engaged later on. And with that, let's move on to our first chapter, which is immersion. What does Medieval Kingdom Wars do to try to get the player invested in the game world? Here, the game has earned a 4 out of 15. The presentation is a top-down perspective with an artistically rendered Europe. Yes, at present the game only includes the European landmass. It also does include local town maps in very much the same artistic style. The game, like any grand strategy game, is going to include a significant amount of statistics to examine and analyze. The game also is going to be using challenge to get players invested into the game world. This is going to be very much a strategic challenge more than any kind of a tactical one, because even in the town battles or the sieges, if the player doesn't choose to use the auto-resolve, it's the decisions that are made at the grand strategy level that are going to have a greater impact on the probability of victory. Finally, the game does attempt to use player agency to get players invested into the game world, in the sense that there are several factions to choose from with additional sub-factions, and that's what the player is going to start out by choosing, a sub-faction. However, we will just point out that the sub-faction that the player chooses, faction that the player chooses, really has more of an impact on their starting position and what cities that they control at the start of the game than anything else. There really doesn't seem to be much of a substantial difference among the factions. Maybe that's a factor of the time period, or maybe just the game developers. And with that, let's move on and talk about difficulty. Here, Kingdom Wars, that we'll be referring to it as for brevity's sake, has earned a 1 out of 15. There are options for political and battle difficulty. One interesting feature that it has is a chill mode for players that are very much more interested in a relaxed gameplay or a relaxed gaming session. The user interface, as we tried to illustrate, is functional, although it isn't in any way excellent. The click detection we certainly found can be somewhat difficult, especially on the town screen, although we did find it somewhat difficult on the grand strategy map as well, especially when we were trying to select a particular army and move them around. Finally, the game does lack a description of the effects of the difficulty settings. Just very, very basic. Okay, this is easier, this is harder, this is very difficult. Lovely. Look, not much specificity there. So a 1 out of 15 is what Medieval Kingdom Wars has earned. And let's talk now, or discuss, the lasting appeal, what it is that's going to keep the game installed on hard drives. Well, here the game again is earned a 4 out of 15. There are diplomacy options, but they're fairly limited until, again, the player governs their entire faction. There are two ways to engage with the software. They are the campaign or the grand strategy mode and the skirmish mode. In the skirmish mode, the player selects a faction both to play as and an attacking faction and a map to choose from. And there are quite a few of them to select from, but it's very much a one-off town management type of game, more like the Age of Empires style of grand strategy than the Crusader Kings or that sort of game. The game does seem to expect players to have a substantial amount of time to devote to it. In all of our evaluation sessions, it took about 30 minutes for a reasonable play session, although an hour is certainly easily within the cards, especially if the player keeps the game at the default time scale. Certainly, of course, a time dilation system exists and that can speed up things, but it's very likely that players are going to miss something if they use the time dilation. So, we will add that the game has some downloadable content. It doesn't have any mod support. However, on the other hand, it does seem like that the developer is very interested in providing additional content to the game for free. So, it does have that going for it. And now then, let's sum everything up in the overall score. Overall, Medieval Kingdom Wars has earned a 3 out of 15. It does, again, seem to require a substantial amount of time devoted to the game to see any sort of progress, or more than likely to restart the game and try again with a different faction. It certainly could be said that there are optimal units that players are going to want to base their armies around that one could say were overpowered. The player certainly has the option of using the auto-resolve, but from our evaluation sessions, it certainly looked, or it seemed as though if the player did not significantly outnumber the opposing faction, the auto-resolve was going to have some difficulty with it. However, using the auto-resolve is not a negative thing, because battles in the game can take a significant amount of time to resolve. Though we did say that we discovered that some of our initial preconceptions about the city view versus the grand strategy view were incorrect, there are still some functions that were only available on the city view. So that remains a point that we do feel worth bringing up. And with that, I don't really think there's anything more to say about Medieval Kingdom Wars. So, from 7th Circle Gaming, thanks very much for watching all the way to the end of the video, and goodbye.